We fear doing too little when we should do more, then atone by doing too much when perhaps we should do less. Robert Trout. The Dragon Pod from Bending Not Breaking. Book 6, Stars. Chapter 6, Moment of Truth. Welcome back to another episode of the Dragon Pod. We're on episode 6 of season 6 of The Dragon Prince, The Mystery of Aaravos. This is Ben Pruitt, your host, and I am thrilled to be here with another special guest. And we just have been having a really fun season. It's been lots of really cool things happening. Really, we had a wild episode last week with all of the deep conversations about what we had last week with Paula, and this week I imagine will be no different, as the lens is just as intense. But before we get there, let me introduce our guest. Y'all have heard her voice before. This is Michal Schick, and she's a phenomenal writer, one of the brains behind the show and behind the season, and many other fun things Dragon Prince related, including several of the reflections that have been posted in between seasons, several of the comics, and some episode credits. So we are thrilled to have her back on the show. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Life is happening. I survived the hurricane that happened down here. Western North Carolina didn't do too hot, but
Oh
Central
dear.
North Carolina is okay, it seems.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's I've been hearing from friends. It's pretty sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, there have been several places that I have been frequently that are literally underwater. So that was wild to kind of think about. But
Oh man.
aside from that, we're just wishing Western North Carolina well and uh, thankful that we're doing okay in Central North Carolina. But how about you? What's new in your life?
Not too much. I've been writing and then writing and writing and writing.
Yeah, that seems like something that a writer would do.
You'd be surprised.
Amazing. Well, are you, or can you share some of the things you've been writing about?
Nothing really. I just have, a bunch of scripts in personal development, and I have some well I have a prose short story that's coming out in an anthology. I'm not sure when though. But it will be in the anthology, so I'm very excited about that.
It's awesome. That's
Thanks.
wonderful. Okay. Well, it's been one week since you looked at me. What? You were able to guest for season 5, and or at least proximate to season 5. So that's it's been a while since we've heard your voice. So I'm curious, are there what is the personal update in terms of your babka loaf extravaganzas and any fun cooking enjoyment things that have been happening? Just for funsies.
Yeah, I haven't done babka in a while just because it is a big
It's a
commitment.
chore. Yeah.
Yes. But I did make challah recently, so that's like babka just without the filling. So, still
Yeah.
counts. And I'm have slowed down my pin collecting, and I'm
Bold choice.
being a little bit more selective on what I spend money on. But
I get
those
that.
are
Yeah.
yeah, it's that I think the season of people spending
Yep.
less money on the great fun things that they otherwise would maybe be silly about.
Yeah.
Um,
I keep saying I'm going to win the lottery, and then, my whole life will change. But,
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I'm looking forward to some, you know, indistinguished point in the future where I can be just very stupid with money. So
yeah, that sounds nice, right? Wouldn't that
it
sound?
does. It
Yeah.
does. I
Oh,
I like tend to like look on Google Flights and like see how much business class is to like very distant parts of the world
yep.
and just be like, That would be nice.
One day, one day. Keep on saying one day. Yeah, I think
Exactly.
that the perhaps too distant future of the one day. Um, but okay, this is a good picture for us. We have some aspirational goals.
Exactly.
We're manifesting this windfall of money coming our way. This is lovely. We got this. Maybe you know what? I maybe this podcast is gonna start bringing in all of the
You
all
never know. They're doing pretty well on Only Murders in the Building, so
true. Yeah. All right. Well, great. I want to kind of dive in and go a little bit closer to why you're here today and talk about the source we have kind of coming up is this primal source. And so I know you had some behind the scenes work on this season. And so I'm curious, are there any moments you remember or firsthand knowledge about kind of the making of whether it be this episode or this season? That you have in your back pocket, an anecdote or a fun fact.
it was a while ago, so it is a little
Yeah.
hard to remember. But I mean, I think this has been said before, but like it is worth saying that this episode was really kind of thrown together, not thrown together. It was supposed to be something else entirely and
Mhm.
was like basically rewritten from the top when we decided to go in a different, when Aaron and Justin decided to go a different way with the pacing of the season. And I was really nervous for a lot of it because we were on a very short time crunch and I was just like I don't know if we can pull it off.
Yeah.
We're not dealing with nothing here, they're pretty intense subjects and
Yeah.
I think each draft I just kept being like, wow, like this is getting better and better, and I'm still like I still was watching it today and I was like, oh, this is such a good episode. We did such a good job.
It is good. And I think I watched this episode and this is like a masterclass on having two completely different stories grappling with a very similar subject. And
Hmm.
it's really fascinating to kind of watch how they look completely different, but they still have this like, oh my gosh, everything's connected kind of a moment. Um, it's written in the stars, right? It's
Hmm.
this connectedness that is just emanating from this and this type of storytelling. So yeah,
Yeah.
super cool. Yeah, I don't know that I had heard that this was like one of the ones that was not originally in the plan. I think I heard someone say that this season had some elements of that there was a change in direction, but I don't recall it being about this episode. So that's really neat that this is the one because this feels like a very pivotal episode in terms of like some character development here.
Yeah, I think everything was the same, I think, until episode 5, and then we decided that like that's when we kind of changed the plot. Or changed pacing, changed direction a little bit. And it like this was the episode that had to be completely rewritten. My episode 7, had to be like mostly rewritten. But there were still plenty of stuff that remained from like the original draft. And
Wow.
then I don't think we'd written 8 and 9 yet. So I think that was like where we got to like take it in that different direction. This is honestly my favorite season of the show. So I love, I love that people seem to have enjoyed it and I
Yeah.
like talking about it.
I think there was definitely more like, I don't know how I feel about this when season 4 dropped, and then again when season 5 dropped. But I didn't, and maybe I'm just not on Twitter as much, but like I didn't sense nearly the amount of like, I don't know how I feel about this as I did with some of the other seasons. So it does seem like this season was exceptionally well received compared to perhaps others.
I
Uh,
think so. I think so. At least I'm also not really on Twitter anymore, but I was like lurking a little bit when it dropped. And I was like, it was really nice because people can be very mean, and then
yeah,
the like reactions that I saw at least were all like, "Oh my gosh, best season yet! Like this is amazing, as good as season 3." And I was like, "Oh,
yeah.
ah."
Yeah,
We all put a lot of our hearts into this. I mean, not that we didn't put into every season, but um I feel like this felt like a lot of a this felt like a culmination of a lot of different things that
yeah.
we managed to work toward.
Yeah, I mean, it's been leading to a lot of the things that happen here. We have been leading to for a while. So the threads are slowly coming to their end, which is kind of wild. Um, okay, so you and I have been tossing around like lens ideas, and ultimately we landed upon a lens that you chose, which is atonement. And I'm curious why why this lens? Why let's start there and then we'll see what happens after that.
Well, the theme of the episode is obviously like honesty and sharing.
Mhm.
So I kind of didn't want to go in that direction just because it was a little obvious.
Go on the
But I
nose.
think that like both Callum and Viren have very clear atonement arcs in this episode. That doesn't mean that that like changes their character entirely, but their path in the episode is one of reconciliation with the self. And
Yeah.
I think that that was like that really is one of my favorite elements of the episode and something I very much wanted to discuss.
Well, it's interesting too because I was trying to figure out like uh, the connotation and the denotation for atonement around like what does it mean versus what do people think it means. And
Mm,
this idea of um, the dictionary definition is reparation for wrong or injury. And reparation is an interesting word, right? Because it, in a religious context, it has a strong religious context, and it's the reparation for or expiation for sin, which is interesting too. And I think about what it means to have atonement, and one of the questions I think I'm going to bring based off some of the scenes in this episode is atonement communal or is atonement internal? And
mm.
I'm curious about your perspective on that, like based off of how you can conceive of it. I'm curious what comes up for you when you think about it.
Um, it's interesting. Like, it's interesting also to talk about it now because the Jewish New Year is in 2 days.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and atonement is a big part of that process. And there's a concept in Judaism of like two different kinds of sin, a sin between a person and God and a sin between a person and other people.
Mm,
And those two are not like treated the same as far as exactly how you have to like atone for them. Like if you're sinning against God, you go through the process and you kind of it's much lonelier. It's not like contingent on somebody saying, and now you are forgiven. Um, if you've sinned against someone else, which is very much, I mean, how nice that like, I mean, obviously Callum hasn't sinned against God, but he is dealing with a personal sin.
yeah,
And Viren's is very much and something that has affected literally every single person around him
yeah,
for years and years of his life. Um, and that is, contingent on the person forgiving you and being willing to accept your apology.
mm,
So like those two things I think are an important part of like just this episode and like the way I think it's okay to have one word that has different meanings in different
yeah,
contexts. I think it's okay to be like atonement for the self is this and atonement for others is this and they're if you follow back the neural network, they're connected at the source, but
yeah,
they're
yeah, yeah.
manifested
Well, and I like one, I like that being able to differentiate, but I also, one of the things I hope we can parse out is what is the difference between atonement versus reconciliation or
differently.
atonement versus reparation or are they the same? Um, and so I think that's something that we'll be able to kind of dive more deeply into when we can use these meaty, very meaty examples that we have to work with. Um, Okay, well, that gives us a little bit of a little dip our toes in the water for some of the things we're going to talk about. But before we really dive in, we have to remind our listeners what happened this episode. And so it's time for our favorite part of the process, which is the 30-second recap. Uh, how you feeling? Are you ready?
Sure. Yeah, I can do this.
Do you want to go first or second?
I'll go second.
All right. Why don't you count me down?
Okay. Three, two, one, go.
Okay, so Callum is all gloomy doomy and like, oh my God, it's a fake pearl, no. And then Viren's writing us a confessional note about trauma and family. And Cosmo's like, oh wait, this is a timeline that Callum can't handle. We're gonna switch that up. And then Callum's like, oh my God, strength. And then Viren and Herod shitty chat, and he's like, no, I'm gonna take that. And then Kapar's gonna be a coin, and that's that. And then Callum's like, no, 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 I'm gonna fly in the stars and get bit by a spider and find my Rayla star. And then Viren's like, oh my God, a scary, scary boy and vivid. Oh, that's time. Uh, I, okay. Well, I almost got there. All right, I'm gonna put 30 seconds on the clock. Are you ready to go?
Sure.
All right. On
Okay.
your mark, get set, go.
Callum feels bad because he's dark, and Viren feels bad because he's in the dark, and writes Soren a letter saying what happened, and he is sorry that he ruined his life. Callum saves his own life by star spider thingy and a hallucination, and it's definitely not a drug metaphor. Don't worry about it. And he flies up and finds his true light, which is Rayla. Then they kiss at the end.
Super cute. Oh, and there's your time. Yes. The kiss. Can you believe I didn't get to the kiss?
I
Oh my
mean,
goodness.
I'm
Like
pretty sure that's why this episode is rated so high on
I
IMDb.
almost guaranteed, right? People replay that moment again and again and again. That like is a fantasy of probably too many people of like, Rayla, go out and we're gonna replay this scene. And that's like people dream about that moment. And have
Yeah.
been dreaming about that moment for years at this point. Um, Amazing. Okay, well, here we are. We made it. We're now in the atonement and moment of truth, and we're combining these two to find pieces that we can talk about. And I want to toss it straight to you. Where do you want to go first?
Let's start with Callum. I feel like that's the slightly not easier, but a little bit lighter version of this.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely in the doomy gloomy in the beginning, but yeah, I have a question about there's a series of things with Callum, and the first thing that comes up for me is he's really beating himself up in the beginning. He is like, "Oh, we're not gonna. We've been working too hard, or not too hard. We've been working so hard with nothing to show for it." And this concept of I this is something that a lot of us do, where we start beating ourselves up over things that we did our very best to do and we still messed up, but we beat ourselves up over it anyway. And part of me thinks that this act of being our own worst critic is an attempt to atone. And
Mm,
uh, uh, and somehow we think if we feel bad enough about it, that that will make it better. And so I'm curious about this. Is that a what how do you feel about that? Is that what do we think about this moment?
that's interesting. I think that's definitely part of how we cope with being disappointed in ourselves.
Hmm.
If we kind of decide that we won't let ourselves off the hook, rightly or wrongly. In this case, really wrongly, that is a kind of, it's not really atonement, it's more like self-reclamation, that is just, you know, ultimately not helpful. But I think when what Callum is dealing with especially is like something he did quite a while ago at this point, like that was like season 2, I think, when he used dark magic for the first time. And like he's done it a bit since then, I think, but like for him to think that he has escaped that or that it hasn't made a mark on him, and then to find that, at least in Cosmo's opinion, it very much has.
Yeah.
I think that that's like, yeah, it's easy to go to a place where you're just like, everything I've done is terrible, because everything since then is, stained by this one act, and it's all pointless and I can't escape it.
Well, it's a little counterintuitive also, right? Because I think like I've definitely done this. I'm definitely my own worst critic, and I'm like, ugh, I should have, I could have, if I had only. And I think that that is not helpful, right? And
Hmm.
in the end, those thoughts typically are not useful. However, there are instances and times where guilt is a necessary feeling in order to do better in the future. And
Hmm.
some people even say that shame is a necessary emotion in order to prevent people from doing bad things. And I guess there's a line here that I'm trying to explore around like where and how do we know when it becomes too much and a misguided uh, attempt to use my pain as a way to make things feel better when they actually don't. Does that make sense as a question?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with action. If
Hmm.
like what this does to Callum is like paralyzes him, right? Like he is really depressed by everything, by the whole prospect. He thinks that, everything that they've done up to this point was pointless, literally.
Hmm.
Um, and we see how that like can expand when in the version of time where Cosmo's like, actually it's even worse than you thought it was.
Yeah.
Like how paralyzing and how like bad that is. So I think that like there's a degree of taking responsibility for what you've done that is positive, and not letting yourself off the hook, and not rewriting an event to make sure that like you were the hero actually, even though you did the wrong thing in that case. But that doesn't mean that like you should just wallow in that. You need to use it as something that can inspire positive change. I think that like inspiring change is a big
Yeah.
key to this whole discussion.
Well, and I think that brings me back to this definition, right? Which is the idea of reparation. Like just feeling bad doesn't repair anything that needs mending. All it does is make you feel bad. And so
Hmm.
if that guilt leads to this thing, you're talking about action, right? If it leads to this change in agency of I feel compelled to do things differently. I feel compelled to act differently in a way that is more aligned with the good that I am trying to accomplish. Then it feels like that is a useful uh, guilt versus
Hmm.
a paralyzing guilt, to use kind of the verbiage you utilized. Um, yeah, like, and this is so easy to say when you're not actually feeling it, but like I want to counsel myself for the future when when I become aware that I'm in this beating myself up mode that like, okay, is this leading me to take action or is this just driving me further down the downward spiral? Uh,
Right. And look, it's tough to balance because there are times in life, unfortunately, when you do have to sit with the fact that you did something wrong, and you like, I would very much like to skip past that part, a lot of the time when, I would just like to be like, oh, okay, fine, I did something wrong, but I'm making better now, like sometimes you do have to
yeah,
be in that uncomfortable place, I think that like this is I
yeah,
think a feeling that people are not like very used to these days is like not feeling bad, but not like letting yourself,
yeah,
I guess, be in touch, like really look in the mirror, and look at the ugly parts of yourself.
yeah.
But that does ultimately have to be, you know, have to lead to progress and action. I don't think that, yeah, almost no matter what you've done, it doesn't like count to just sit around. There may be a couple of very extreme examples,
And
but
there's always an exception to every rule,
yeah.
right?
I mean, if you've literally murdered someone, then maybe you should just sit around and feel bad about it for the rest of your life. But like, the when I am feeling really like depressed and angry at myself, I like go back and I'm like, okay, I haven't killed anyone. Like, let's take a step back. Nothing is that dire.
Yeah. Well, and I find this really compelling if we jump later down Callum's timeline of it's really interesting to me that this journey that he's going on to quote find the one deep truth, which I that's an interesting thing for it to be like Rayla, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. But I think what I do take this journey to be is a journey towards like that healing the rift that needs mending within him. And to me, like if I were to metaphorize this and layer on what dark magic does to the body and the person is it's a form of trauma.
Hmm.
It's a form of fracturing. And what trauma does to the body is it takes us and breaks us into pieces thinking that this piece is not suitable for this situation and not okay to so I'm going to hide a part of myself from Rayla, right, for forever because I'm not willing to share the bad things that I've done, and it creates distance. And we see how that trauma led him when Rayla showed up back way back when. How he responded was in pain. It was a pained response, and he regrets how he responded. And it takes him to this point where he has now, quote, healed and this rift within him. And now he's able to go back to that very moment and say, this is how I would have liked to have done that. And it makes it so that he's able to remove that distance that was there between him and his, North Star, so to speak. Um, and so I think I'm curious about the nature of atonement here because there's this is part of the internal versus external question, right? Because everything that has been going on within him has been very internal, but it has also been affecting everyone around him in an albeit very different way. It's just affecting his interactions with the people he really cares about. And perhaps preventing a relationship that could have started years sooner. Um, okay, that was a lot. I am going to pause and invite like what bubbled up to the surface while I pontificated a little bit.
Ah, I mean, I think the thing I'm thinking about is how sometimes when bad things happen to people who are in touch with their emotions generally, and I think I would put Callum in that category, you can blame yourself, like either consciously or subconsciously. It's like, I deserve this, whatever. And I think that Callum getting that message from Cosmo, I think that's confirmation for him,
Mm,
that he doesn't deserve Rayla, that he was right in not kissing her in the frozen ship. Sorry, everyone, because he is ruined and he did do dark magic and all that stuff. Um, so I think that's I I think it's important to parse it like exactly why Rayla is his North Star. Like I think it totally works on kind of the just the basic level. Like ultimately he loves her and that is like the guiding force in his life and that's completely fine. But I think that there's a lot of self-discovery in that as well. I don't think that this is just Callum being like, everything's fine because I love Rayla. I think,
yeah.
he has come to a point where he is capable of realizing how important she is and how worthy he is of
Hmm.
being with her. They aren't like what, in my opinion anyway, the ritual really frees him of is that feeling that he is unworthy. And
Yes.
I mean, Rayla appears as like, like literally a constellation. It's like the point in the darkness. He is, and another thing, like when Astrid says, you don't need to look out, you need to look in. This isn't necessarily about. I mean, it is about Rayla, but it's also not about Rayla.
No, I think that's really helpful contextualizing because I think it would be easy for someone who isn't thinking too hard, perhaps, to be like, oh, if I were Callum, that would mean that I just need to listen to everything Rayla says and be like, that's the end. If I just do what Rayla says, everything's going to be great. But I love this reconfiguration of emphasizing that this is an internal journey for him of recognizing what is important to him and what what matters to him. And if you take it even from like a value lens, like it really shows us what he values, which seems to be, as you're kind of clarifying here, love, right? And
Hmm.
what is what is love? Uh just like cultivating this sense of like this is being let love guide you rather than, let Rayla guide you in
Right.
yeah, that's an interesting
Yeah, and it's
yeah.
important also because I think dark magic is the opposite of that in many ways. Like it as much, and I don't want to say like any act of dark magic makes you like the evilest person in the world, but it is a selfish act. It is taking from something else and using it for your own purposes, even if you're turning around like Claudia and using that to save Soren or save Viren or whatever. The mechanism is a selfish one. So I think healing that within himself, healing that selfishness, whether real or perceived, on Callum's part,
Yeah.
is a really important part of why he is able to come full circle and be with Rayla.
Yeah, I can't help when I think of the word atonement, I often will separate it in my head to at one ment.
Oh, interesting.
And when I think about, and I think it's in this context very interesting. It just that layers onto this metaphor of the fracturing of trauma, right? When it breaks us apart, and we can't atone or be at one or one with ourselves truly and fully integrated until we have done the moved through that healing process. And I mean that's like the definition of, or the root of integrity is integrare, which is
Mm.
to integrate, it's to become one. And that is really interesting in this context of thinking about how often when we feel like we have to hide a piece of ourselves from others, that is probably speaking to what you were talking about earlier about this healing between yourself and God, right? This atonement between the quote sin of being separated or distanced from God versus this, relational atonement between people.
Hmm.
I think they are so inextricably connected, right? Because, and that's why honestly, part of the work that I've been doing around trauma is thinking about it from a spiritual lens. And I think that this is perhaps a digression or an aside from, but I feel like any traumatic experience is a necessarily and inherently a spiritual experience.
Mm.
When we become traumatized or experience trauma, it is this fracturing, which is inherently creating distance from God because we are separating pieces of ourselves. Um, that is a hot take that but here we are. That's
No, that's fascinating.
uh,
It actually kind of makes me think about the Hebrew word for repentance, and we can discuss whether repentance and atonement are exactly the same thing, or we could leave that for another 3 hour long philosophical discussion. But the root of the word is to return, and the idea is that you are returning to your true self.
yeah,
The self that has done wrong is a different version and a lesser version of you, and you are capable of going back to, I guess, you prime.
yeah. I mean, it's a very similar concept, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, I can't help but think about that when I think about this. Um, we'll see if it continues to come up.
Yeah.
Uh, other moments of Callum's journey that we want to touch on that feel like useful for us.
Um, I like that he kind of has to lose all hope, that he has to, obviously dramatically, we
Out of
can't just have him like fly super up and be like, oh, cool, it's Rayla,
yeah,
but like, um, but the fact that, he finds that in what is truly like his darkest moment. He is physically falling. He is blindfolded. He can't
autonomy.
breathe. Yeah, I think is an important thing to keep in mind because like things can get super difficult, and the spark of light that's going to change everything, or at least make change possible, you don't have to think it's not going to come just because everything is super dark, you know?
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too because if we think about the moments of change in the quote the rock bottoms for people in this show, because we're that's the idea is we're using this show as the text versus all of the other potential stories, is all of the moments of rock bottom are in pursuit of good, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so Callum hits rock bottom in the air as he is spending all of his last capacities to find this inner truth. Viren experiences this change after he is like started to feel remorse and sees Claudia, and he's like, okay, I hit rock bottom when I see that my child is doing what I have done, and I have to walk away from this. And his rock bottom is now in this experience where he's like, I can no longer continue to do this. We haven't seen Claudia's rock bottom yet, which is wild because she's been down in the depths for a little bit. But it feels like, and maybe this is just me, but it feels like these moments are often in pursuit or when there has been a decision to do right. And that's when
Hmm.
rock bottom hits, not during the doing wrong portion. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think that was honestly really important to Aaron. I mean, I'm projecting here, but something he said a lot is that dark magic is the easy way, you know? It's not the only way. It's just easier,
Yeah.
Like, and Star Wars has similar, ideas, obviously, that like the path to the dark side is easy and you get power quickly and you can use it, but there's a more like a pure and more enduring ability that comes with the
Yeah.
struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's wild. Okay. All right. Um, I think it might be useful to, instead of going straight to Viren and Soren, to go to I have a couple questions around Cosmo and Astrid.
Hmm.
Um, and since that's closer to the Callum timeline, I think that we can go there. There's this moment of uh I think feedback is perhaps a useful component in terms of something to consider in regards to atonement. Um,
Hmm.
because it is Astrid that calls Cosmo out and says, "You're still my stupid brother, even though you can see everything." Right? Of don't be so insensitive and tell the truth, right? And you know, I am curious about whether feedback is necessary for atonement or if feedback is just an accelerator or a catalyst. And I'm curious about your perspective on that.
I think some kind of feedback, but that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be like person to person feedback. It might be the universe talking to you, or it might be the sight of something that has changed or that you have changed. I think that, you can't create change without recognizing change. And
Yeah.
uh, I think I think Cosmo on his own would just have been like, well, I guess the humans really, you know, sad now. Oh well, as opposed to connecting that to what he has actually done. And it's not, it's not to like totally destroy Cosmo here.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's an understandable, telling the truth again is an understandable thing to do. But for him to be to receive that information, I guess that it was not what the situation called for. I think, yeah.
It's also really interesting because we've talked about this on the podcast for years now about this idea of just because it's the truth doesn't mean you should say it. Like
Hmm.
there's this idea of people say, well, I guess I'm just not going to be authentic then if I can't tell the truth. And it's like, no, no, the blunt, hard truth that you're telling is not accomplishing the goal that you're trying to accomplish. There's
Hmm.
this like element of just just because it's the truth doesn't mean you have to say it in a specific way, or like there's this weird morally and ethically kind of intangible around truth here. And I think we see the complexity in this episode, which is what makes it so really, really scrumptious, is that sometimes the truth is more than it seems, which is wild to say, but like it will actively be counterproductive sometimes. And so it's difficult to parse out when and how to deliver truth. Uh,
Hmm.
but this filter that we're provided by Astrid, right? It is Astrid, right? Of does it provide purpose, clarity, and light, right? Is a really interesting filter for whether I should say something or not. And I'm curious, you know, it is obviously part of the show and part of the writing, but I'm curious what you think about this filter.
I love this filter. And my favorite part is actually the like, are you shifting a burden to somebody who needs all their strength?
Yeah,
Because I think that's such an important, like you can't tell the truth without the context of who you are telling the truth to and what they're experiencing, right? Like telling the truth, like I love mint chocolate chip ice cream, is not going to put a particular burden on pretty much anyone. But the idea that it is that it that knowledge can actually sap someone's ability to do what they most need to do, as we like clearly see with Callum,
yeah,
and what they would want to do, you know, if they were in a better headspace. I think one of the most powerful things is that Callum stops wanting to like to change, to atone. Like he doesn't think it's possible. Um, so I, you know, like it definitely needs to, you know, light and to give light and all that stuff. But I think, sorry, clarity, light, and purpose. I see it written there in the document. Um, but um, but to me, the most important part is that bit at the end, where
yeah.
you're considering the impact, not just of the words, but on the person who it's going to.
Yeah, and we see these these timelines, right? Where in one instance, Cosmo tells Callum that he has a void in his heart and he needs to repair it by finding his inner truth, and it leads him down the path of I give up, I can't do this. And then we see a different timeline where the way he shares this information is certainly omitting information that he knows, but it's
Mhm.
also giving Callum the strength that he needs in order to do the thing that he wants to accomplish. And
Mhm.
so I guess the question is when you know everything, are we morally compelled to share that information? And I don't know. I think that if you were to ask, 100 people, I don't know exactly what the percentage would be, but I bet it would not be zero that they would have said, no, he needs to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Yeah.
um, which is kind of wild to me. But I also don't have a well thought out answer as to like, here's the philosophically uh, oriented description about why this is the way to do things is to not shift burden onto people who don't, need this burden.
Right. I
Which is
think,
compelling to think about.
oh, it's very compelling. And I think this is one of my favorite things in the show, where it's like it doesn't have to have a perfect answer, you know? Like I think that you can definitely make the case that somebody should know that, you know, the pearl in Catullus is the one that actually has Erebos inside it. um,
Yeah.
um, by the way, side funny note, when we were writing episode 3 and we knew they had the fake pearl, I somebody, I don't remember who, was like, why is it melting when the ship is on fire? And we just decided that Barrios's chocolate does not melt. So that's, you know, it would act exactly like the real pearl.
The candy coating. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. It's totally protected.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, but I think the point is that Callum is not the person who needs to be told that right now. Like Actually, maybe he should have told Rayla,
right?
or
Or
sent
something.
a message, or yeah. But like, it's also, in my opinion anyway, okay that Cosmo, who has like just gotten these, you know, literally like phenomenal cosmic powers, like is not necessarily the most like emotionally intuitive guy out there. And it does become a, do you say something or you do not say something for him,
Yeah,
who is again a teenager who is like literally never met anyone outside of his tower as far as we can tell.
yeah. A little culty, but that was for last episode for our
That's a different discussion.
discussion. um, okay, I have been like eagerly like anticipating the next phase of this, which is this letter. This letter. Oh, this is vivid descriptions that are like, honestly, as I replayed it, I listened to this segment with him talking about what he did to his wife, and I was uncomfortable. I like the first time I watched it, I kind of like I was just like, oh wow, that's intense. But as I watched it again and again, I was like, wow, this is really uncomfortable. Um,
It's, I mean, maybe a content warning should go at the top of this, but like
yeah,
it's sexual assault coded,
yeah,
you know. It's not sexual assault. I want to be very clear, but it's coded that way.
yeah.
Um, and it's, I think, to me, a real sign of the depths that people will go, and then the resulting depths that that inspires in other people.
Mhm.
Like to me, I grappled for a very long time about why Lissa would leave the kids, like why she wouldn't just be like, come with me, we're going. And I still don't think that you have to say that she made the right decision. But to me, after your husband does that to you,
Yeah,
I don't need any more explanation for why she was like, I need to leave.
yeah, yeah. It really does. I mean, again, if you poll 100 people, you're gonna get people who are like, "How dare she leave her children after that?"
Hmm.
Like, and I 100% agree with you that like that was immediate grounds for walking away. And like this idea of responsibility for children is a really interesting thing to negotiate too, because of course, I think that if you choose to have a child, that where it is your choice to do so, then there is inherent responsibility built into caring for that child. And there is the also like I have to take care of me. And if so, there's a wild, questionable like, but it is questionable, but there I just don't have any blame at the same time.
Yeah.
Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
exactly. It doesn't have to be the right decision that everyone would make, but I at least understand. I also personally, I think that she felt that she could trust that Viren would not hurt her children. I do think that she thought that they were safe with him. And also, like, we don't know, like, we don't know how long she thought this was going to be. Did she think that she would come back, or did she think that, there's any number of things that she could have like rationalized in her mind.
Did something
And
happen right after she left that prevented
yeah, exactly. There's a million possible options, and I think that like having it's so messy and it's so imperfect and ugly, and I love that about this, and I love that about this whole storyline because
yeah
like down to what Viren chooses to do with the letter, I think you can fully argue either way.
one
Um,
I
but like, yeah.
yeah
This is a rule, by the way. Just because our characters in the show do something does not mean we're being like, that's correct. Like,
yeah no that's yeah uh yeah I just this it's so interesting, right? Because we see the trajectory if we just follow the staff, right? This staff of Ziard is uh, a really interesting piece of the thing to follow.
mhm.
Because like we see Kapar saying, no, this is not something that I'm willing to do. And Viren literally says a child's life is on the line. And Kapar says, it's not that you haven't moved me, but I still have to say no. And that
Right.
is wild, right? Because if you are someone who doesn't understand what that staff is capable of, then you're sitting here going like, "Oh my God, you're not going to give over a staff for a child's life?" But
It's
having
one spell, right?
just
Surely it's just
one
one spell.
yeah, yes. And so we have this thing where it's like in every instance of dark magic, like there are people who are arguing, of course you're going to trade a magma titan's life for hundreds of thousands of people living for because they're of this food shortage, famine, that's the word, that was that was happening in the kingdoms beforehand. And of course you would do this to save your brothers and, bring back, you would take out a deer to give your brothers movement and paralysis a cure. Of course you would, but when you stack all of those things on top of all of the other inevitable things that happen because of access to this, there was also hundreds of thousands of lives that were taken because of this.
Hmm.
And so, yes, it does do good, but it is also inextricably connected to doing so much bad that we have yet to see someone who is capable of only using it for those truly one-off ethical decisions, right?
Right.
Like,
I think it's possible that Kapar is at least one of those people because
yeah,
it seems like he has actively denounced dark magic.
yep,
He is not using the staff. He knows Viren very well, and he is the one who is telling him that he can't be the one to use this kind of magic and this staff. I don't see Kapar as a hero, but I do think that he might have been somebody who conquered that particular demon.
yeah. And well, I guess we may or may not ever know. We'll,
Mhm.
uh, yeah, who knows? But yeah, given it was really interesting. The first time we met Kapar, I was sitting here like, oh yeah, evil mage guy, definitely, like definitely giving off those vibes, especially because the context in which we see him is like a fever dream of Viren,
Mhm.
right? And so it's like whether that's accurate to the actual character is interesting because when you watch it in the scenes depicted in this letter, very different. Um, so yeah, it's just wild to think about. Super neat.
I,
Uh,
I think, I mean, you could even, and this is strictly me talking, but you could even view Kapar as having his own kind of atonement arc if it's the case that he actively gave up and rejected dark magic and is, willing to go through tough things to prevent other people from using dark magic, then that's an act of atonement. Like my kind of rule is like, are you the person who would at the end of the process, are you the person who would do the same thing again, or are you somebody who would not do that thing? And it
mm,
seems like he is the person who would not do that thing. Now, it's not Kapara's son, Soren is not his kid. Um, we don't we don't know, like, obviously he's not happy about it. We don't know, like, to what degree he feels, devastation, a parent's devastation, um, about losing him. But like, I like to think of Kapar in that because we know so little about him, but
yeah,
he is so pivotal in this that I like to personally headcanon him as somebody who has like passed through the fire of dark magic and is rejecting it, which is what Vera does. So
yeah. Well, and it's interesting because this is the question for me, which you were talking about earlier of these two different types of atonement, but Viren is very much on a path to both, where
mm,
it feels as though um, part of me wonders if uh, this atonement or this even like if you take this other phrasing of it, this at one ment comes when you become at peace with your the choices that you've made and the fact that you would do things differently, and there's this recognition that I have accepted the consequences, and I know that I have I have done these things, and I am going to actively accept that I have done these things, and I'm at peace with that. Um, and there's this element of Viren in this past couple episodes, like fighting to deliver this message, and like not necessarily even get forgiveness from the people that he's talking to, but like I have to communicate so that you know that this is true, that you know that I meant this and I cared about you and I want that you to know. And the act of withholding this note is seemingly creating an act of peace within him of saying, I will no longer burden my child. Right?
Hmm.
That's what especially in the context of this phrase that is repeated, which I am not going to shift the burden onto someone else by telling the truth. And that really puts this lens on Viren's perspective of I am not going to burden my son any longer, and I'm going to burn this and be at peace with the fact that he will just not like me. And
Yeah.
um, that feels like a form of atonement, right? His actions literally change. Um, okay, I'm done. Tell me what
No, I think that's super important because ultimately what he decides to do is to not like demand forgiveness of Soren, you know? And he's like he Viren can go down the path of atonement on his own, however far he can go himself, and I think he goes pretty far as recognizing what he's done and regretting it and being the person who wouldn't do that again. But he doesn't do that thing that, like, I mean, you can always tell, right, when there's somebody who wants forgiveness but like really kind of just wants the words, like just say, okay, I'm sorry, so like you forgive me now, right? You forgive me. It's back on you, like bounces off of me and sticks to you or whatever.
yeah,
And Viren is actively choosing to not do that. And it's also like it's it's really heavy stuff,
it is,
you
yeah,
know.
absolutely.
Like I don't know that Soren would have been better off knowing why Lissa left. I mean, at least coming from Viren, maybe coming from Lissa, but I don't know about, you know, uh, it's a really tough thing, I think about like what information is there in that letter that Soren desperately needs.
Yeah,
And maybe the very bit at the end about how the reason why, which is just I love it so much, but it's horrible, and I love it, and it's horrible. But like the fact that Viren blamed Soren for Lissa leaving and his life falling apart is so perfect and human and horrible.
yes,
Maybe Soren would be better off if he knew that part, but you can't tell him that part without telling him all the rest, And like, is he really going to be that much better off? Like I think we see in episode 8, like Soren is, an incredible person now. He has done his own arc of atonement. He has like stood up against Viren, and a lot of that was against Viren specifically.
yep,
Um, so I don't know. Again, I think you can write like compelling fan fiction of him reading the letter and and having a totally legitimate alternate plot line. Maybe Cosmo could tell us what happened. But like I I guess I love that Viren doesn't feel that like
well,
he has to hear the words "I forgive you."
and what I like I think is unspoken and often forgotten by people who might be like, oh, it's not giving him this, is that Viren doesn't think he's about to die.
Right.
He doesn't think he's never going to have this opportunity again, right? It's that now's not the appropriate time,
Yeah.
right? There's this and I think that's what makes it so visceral when later on in this season is like, oh my gosh, there was so much left unsaid. That
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
and I think that in that context, that makes this moment hit that much harder. And it is one of those things where like people talk about how like, well, people regret 100, you miss 100% of the shots you never take. And I'm like, that again, that is saying that this is Viren's shot to miss.
Hmm.
Right? But what he's doing is he's saying, I'm no longer going to be a blocker for you, Soren. I'm going to get out of the way so that you can take shots if you want. If you ask me, I'll tell you. If you want this, I give it to you, but I'm not going to force it on you. Um, yeah, it's wild, right? And who knows? There are so many different ways he could have given it to him. It's like, hey, Soren, in the same way, I want you to hear this. You may not believe it now, but I want you to hear it so that you have it later, like he did in the last episode. I want you to have this letter. I don't want you to read it now, but one day when you're ready, here's the opportunity. Um, I don't know, right? And like I
Hmm.
don't know, like if I were talking to someone through this in a therapy session, I would never make this decision for them. I would be like,
Yeah.
listen, this you're the only person that can make this decision. We can walk through what might happen, and we can go through like we can be Cosmo and like go down these pathways and figure out what you think might happen. And ultimately, you have to decide what's right for you, and frankly, whether it's shifting a burden onto someone unfairly.
Yeah. Or at all. I think Theron's decision to just be like, this is on me, it is not on you, I think is incredibly powerful because like especially coming from, seasons 1 through 3, like all he did was kind of like
Yep.
try and force all these actions and burdens on Soren, and like force Soren to feel like he was free of that because Viren was dead, and then for him not to be free of that because Viren wasn't dead. And then, I think it's also like it's legitimate to be like the situation, Viren's done too much bad stuff. Like he can't fix the situation like this.
Yeah.
Just like telling Soren the truth, even the truth that like it was my fault that I was mean to you or whatever, it's not enough to fix things. And you're right, if they had another 20 years, maybe they could have gotten there, but they don't.
Yeah. Oh, so you know this the I'm part of me is thinking that these two diverging forms of atonement are more inextricably connected than one can make it out to seem.
Mhm.
Like it feels like you really Viren has to do the inner work of, atoning with the self as he is doing this atonement with others. Like it seems like there is a necessary connectedness between like I cannot heal with other people until I have healed with myself, and I cannot
Yeah.
heal with myself until I have begun the repair with other people. Um,
I mean,
it,
I think when he says like she was right, I became a monster, like I think that is his moment of being this this was my personal sin, you know.
and I think I want to I think my last point that I want to focus on is the nature of confession as it relates to atonement.
Hmm.
And, this idea of this feels so like, oh my God, Jason Simpson.
Oh my God.
It
Oh my
is
God.
like, it is when he says no, just the word no at the end, and like, do you have anything to give me? I get chill. I'm getting chills just thinking about it. Like it's like it is visceral how much that one syllable carries. It is so intense. So one, kudos. Two, I forgot what I was going to say because I was just blown away by that. That was just so distracting on how good it was.
Uh no, but I'm complete. I'll sing Jason's praises for forever. I mean, like, and being able to talk to him a little bit about Viren's journey, like the amount of soul that he puts into that character was like truly like astonishing and phenomenal. And like it felt like obviously I was only a small part of Viren's journey, but like I was like very proud to share in that like responsibility almost, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that. Yeah. Um, I truly don't remember what I was going to say. Um,
The public and the private.
confessions. The idea of confession being a part of atonement, right?
Mhm.
The question for me, I think, is Viren says because he is writing, right? Because he is putting this into paper form, like words on a page, he has to literally say it, right? He is verbally processing in a way that I think verbal processing is the component here that makes this really compelling of
Mhm.
putting it into words on a page, this assault, right? And and that's what I think is so powerful about Jason's saying it, like putting it to words, verbalizing it is an act of immense confession, right? Where we can know that we've done bad things, but to put language to it is to make it
Mhm.
so much more concrete. And I'm curious about like your thoughts on the necessity of language to confess versus just the feeling of confession. Um, does that make sense as a question?
Yeah. I mean, look, again, just to go back to my Jewish well of Jewishness, like a huge part of the Yom Kippur like liturgy is we repeat a confession
Yeah.
many times, and you actually do it in two parts. So you do it silently to yourself, and then you do it publicly, and the whole congregation recites it together. And like it very much is that idea of like, and it's complicated liturgy. Not every thing that you say like necessarily jumps out at you as like, oh yeah, I did that wrong thing, and there's a lot of like thought put into like explaining to people like what does this mean, like what does this sentence like imply, and think about it for yourself, and how does it, what have you done this past year that you think maybe fits under this category, or what can you, even if you haven't like sinned, what can you improve on so that you don't,
Yep.
and it's like there that is a very um yeah, extremely tactile and like it's a weird feeling, at least, in synagogue on Yom Kippur, because everybody's, you're fasting, you're tired, you're standing a lot, like, but there is this idea of like both we're all in this together, and also it is just you and God and like just in that.
Well, and I just think about like the necessity like of our wiring, our
Hmm.
brain chemistry, our biology wanting that kind of processing in order to feel. And it feels as though to me there is plenty of evidence that suggests that writing things down is a huge component of a healing process, but also
Hmm.
what I think it really is putting language to something to give it something where your brain can actually make the connections that are so subconscious that are not in your forward big brain, prefrontal cortex, but they're so buried deep in your reptile brain that it feels as though that's the kind of processing that is required for the chemistry of atonement, not just the spirituality of atonement. Does that
Yeah.
right? Does
No,
that
completely. And it has to have its place in the process, right? Like you can't just like I don't think Viren would have been capable of this even in episode one, or episode three, when he shows up at Katalis. I think it is this like the conversation that he has with Soren, and it's five, right? With the back and forth that they have. Like it's been, he can't just reject Erebos and then be like, oh yes, here's what I did and all the whatever. Like it's a process of coming to terms with himself, what it means to leave Claudia. Again, another thing that you could be like, maybe good, maybe bad, we don't know. Um, to until he can get to this point of, like I guess the important thing to think of for me is that like these are very difficult and real emotional like realities, and just like you need a plan and steps to conquer kind of a lot of issues in life, or a workout plan or whatever, you know, you need a process for atonement. And I think that having it culminate in that like declarative language based yeah, whatever is super important.
Mm. Well, this has been
Light topics over here.
this is a rich conversation that is totally for anyone and everyone. Amazing. Okay, what have we missed, if anything?
um Harrow is gonna talk to Sarai about taking their relationship to the next level.
Like just a little boy just trying to,
Yeah.
mac on his loved one. Yeah. It's I found that really interesting too because Viren, sits down and offers his friend advice of like it's the person you love. You should do anything for the person you love. And that's when you see it click for Viren too.
Mhm.
Oh, I should do anything.
Yeah.
And,
Which for that's his MO for the rest of the show.
correct.
Like he never changes from that.
Well, and it's really interesting because I think, I cannot help but compare this to the turf writing that is in Harry Potter, but the true act of atonement for creating a Horcrux and murdering other people is remorse.
Hmm.
And I think that for Viren, it is so painful to admit. And so it's easier to just dig deeper into this hole than it is to feel the pain of what he has already caused with Lissa, with Kapar. He's already done like what is essentially murder with Kapar.
Hmm.
He's already like assaulted his wife. The act of feeling that amount of pain and remorse on top of the loss of his would be like dying child if he does stop here is I can see why he isn't able to do it. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's the right decision, but I can see why he doesn't. Um, it's just
No,
devastating.
and it is a little bit like sin begetting sin, right? Because he saves Soren's life, but it comes at such a cost. Like that sin is what causes him to then mistreat Soren, which is another painful thing that he eventually like in this like excavation of all of that feeling, it becomes such a big part of it.
Just
And
lay.
it's like why he can't deal with Claudia, because like there's too much, bound up in that because Claudia is bound up in Soren.
Yeah. Oh, all right, y'all. We have uh what a good episode, obviously. Like, did you not hear this conversation? So amazing. We are going to take a short break and we're going to come back for our final couple of segments, sacred practice and gratitude, and then we will close out with any plugs that might be useful for y'all to hear about. All right, we'll be right back. Woohoo! We did it. We're back and we are excited to dive into our practice. This is episode 6, which means this is the last time we're doing Lectio Divina for our practice. And so we're going to transition to a new practice for 7, 8, and 9. But for now, we get to do this one more time. And for those of you who weren't able to listen to the past couple episodes, I will give you a short synopsis of what this is. Essentially, Lectio Divina translates to divine reading in Latin. And traditionally, it comes from a Christian prayer practice that involves reading scripture in a meditative way. Sometimes it's read multiple times and given a lot of food for thought. Sometimes it's considered to be like a ladder under which you are climbing into the text more deeply, if you like the metaphors. But it's essentially helping
Love a
people,
metaphor.
right? We love metaphors. Um, Helps people develop a closer relationship with the sacred by listening to the text with heart and engaging the whole self. And so, as we had kind of adapt this practice for our own use on this podcast, we are kind of using a line from the Dragon Prince to help us learn from the show and from each other. And so the quote that I have chosen by random pin drop is a juicy one. Uh, After all this, after all I had done, I blamed you, Soren. Whew. So this is one for the books here. So this is a four-step practice, and so we're going to take it one by one. And the first step is the literal meaning. What is literally happening on the show to give us this line? And essentially, Viren is writing this letter, right? It's his biggest confession. He claims that this is the biggest piece of his confession in a letter to Soren, and he is explaining how what he most regrets is how he blamed Soren, and that is despite all of his other heinous acts that he has done. Um, and that's kind of what's literally happening. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Well, now that means we are just easing down this ladder, right, into our next rung, so to speak, which is we're moving from the literal meaning to the allegorical meaning. And so this is, as I read this line, what does this line remind you of in the rest of Dragon Prince canon? What does it remind you of in other pieces of fiction or media or story? And so I'm going to invite you to think about allegory and what does it remind you of? So here comes the quote once more. After all this, after all I had done, I blamed you, Soren.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go back to the source that you referenced earlier, because it it really does remind me of after all this time, always.
Oh, yeah. So this is Snape, right? Okay.
Yeah, and that is such a complicated line of itself, right? Like I know it's become like I don't know, people get tattoos of it or whatever, and
You abuse.
whatever floats your boat. But like I think, it's also really complicated because Snape was a bad person
Yeah,
and was also like he wasn't, quote like love did not redeem Snape or,
yeah.
whatever, however you would want to think about it. He was actually willing to do incredibly bad things for that purpose. And I think that like the the complicated nature of that is actually really well reflected in the complicated nature of this line, right? Because this is
Absolutely.
actually I don't think Snape ever really like gets that. He
The
I
atonement
mean,
is questionable.
yeah, exactly. We can spend another 4 hours talking about Snape, but like I think that Viren has like superseded Snape in this context because he is recognizing like the good and the bad, right? Like I saved your life, but it came at so many costs, and the cost that my love for you turned into something horrible and dark and damaging to you.
Yeah, and it's after all of this. I have if this were Snape talking, it's no, I've loved you always, but that's
Hmm.
not what's happening. It's no, I did what I started this because I loved you and I ruined everything for that, and because of that I blamed you. And like, oh my goodness, like that is just this there's an element of this feels more true even than the question about like, is what Snape did really love, or was it more obsession? Was it more like, there's this question
Hmm.
here. I think you're right. There's something that feels different around this. Yeah. Oh, that's a good pull. I love that. Um, the word blame is what pops up to me, and like
Mm,
about how you know, there's a lot of blame in the show, in The Dragon Prince, where people will, I, you did this, and they get into little snippets, and then they usually will resolve those things. And often the blame feels more minor than this does. And uh, this is something that he held on to for not only seasons of the show, but years of like almost the entirety of Soren's life. Uh,
mhm.
and, between Callum and Rayla, or, between other passing spats, it was always quick to resolve. And I guess what I'm thinking about is just how uh, painful it is to hold on to this for so long. And just being angry all the time is hard.
Yeah. And blaming someone else is hard, you know?
Yeah.
I think part of why Viren feels like I don't know if better is the word, but like somewhat lighter after this process is because he is accepting that blame, like he is not only telling Soren in his own way, like I'm gonna take this burden, but like it's almost like this is now where it was supposed to be, and like in acknowledging that it is inherently lighter.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, okay. We've touched on allegory. We are going to slowly continue to climb down this rung, or this ladder rather, into the next rung, and talk about the personal meaning. And so this is our step 3, where we talk about how this quote resonates in our personal lives. What does it remind us of that we have experienced ourselves? uh, so yeah, it's not heavy at all. Here we go. Uh, After all this, after all I had done, I blamed you, Soren. Oh, this is bad. Okay, yeah, I immediately immediately think of my dad. And like he's a very effusive personality, of like very quick to like laughter, and lights up a room. And you know, there were things that I really appreciated about that, but there were also things that he did that I'm incredibly resentful over, that, I still blame him for. And it's like after all this, like I still carry that a little bit and haven't let that go. So that just feels true to form. Here we are. Like I'm, here. It's not like an active, and this is, I think, why sometimes it goes on for so long, is that I don't have to feel it in order to continue going on with my life.
Hmm.
I can like it's not a thing that I need to process in order to do almost everything in my life. It's only when I'm in proximity or need to interact that that becomes an issue. So that makes me wonder like how easy it is to hold on to that and almost believe it to be something else. Um, yeah, that's what I think of. Feel free to not be as open if you.
um, yeah, I think I'm just gonna say that this has resonance for me and then leave it there if that's okay.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. Like it's a lot. um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think we hold on to as people, and this perhaps again, I'm reminded of the quote of the reason we try to empathize with quote villains is not because we are trying to uh, excuse their behavior, but rather to remind us all that we are capable of the very same. And
Hmm.
here I am being like, oh yeah, I did this. We are like recognizing that we all have this within us, right?
Yeah.
um, okay, we're gonna slowly climb on down this ladder into our last step. And so we've definitely dived, dove deeply into this quote, and I'm going to read it again and invite either Whether this is inviting you to have like a call to action, what is this calling you to do or change? Um, or if you were to use this line uh, as a source for a story with a moral, what is the moral you would want to deliver or the message you want someone to walk away with after hearing this? And so here is the line one last time. After all this, after all I had done, I blamed you, Soren.
I think to me that it's worth thinking of like the times we blame other people, and that doesn't necessarily mean that that we're wrong to do that, or that the blame has to, reflexively, like if it's not on them, it has to go on us or whatever. But I think maybe considering like if all that blame is necessarily right and useful in every context. And sometimes it is, but especially maybe things that you've been dealing with for a long time, just deciding even to ease off a little bit, to release some of those feelings.
Yeah, I think this is just a clear reminder to continue to like look inward and blame is very much a you, and it's just a reminder that you have a bunch of fingers pointing back at you when you're pointing at someone, and
Hmm.
it's just a reminder to check yourself a little bit, I think is the one liner I would provide for this is check yourself or you.
But be kind to yourself.
Yeah, check yourself, but also be kind to yourself, um, for sure. Okay, thank you for diving into this practice with me. This has been a fun experience, a little heavy experience, but fun experience.
Yeah, this is crazy.
We are doing. I want to finish up by talking about gratitude. Who is a character from this episode that you are thankful for and why?
um, I think on like the widest level, it's Viren, just because of what he is willing to take on for himself, and that self-honesty is something I am grateful for and appreciate. But I do also want to shout out Astrid, just because,
Yeah,
coming in like, sometimes you need somebody to just like tap you gently upside the head and be like,
yep,
you're going about this the wrong way. The perspective you need is this, and and then you can continue on much more effectively.
absolutely. Um, Amazing. I was also gonna say Viren, potentially for obvious reasons, but I think specifically for the moment of like he's holding this letter in his hand, Soren can see it and is looking at it even, and he just gets tears in his eyes and says, "No, he was mistaken," and like that moment is uh, an immense act of change, and I think that it's really beautiful. So I'm really thankful for that moment. Um, yeah, that's my moment. Uh,
Lovely.
okay, that brings us to the end. If people want to find you because of your brilliance, how would you invite them to find you?
Oh gosh. I'm not using Twitter as like a Twitter anymore, but I am posting updates there occasionally if I have something to share. So that's Ink as Rain, INKASRAIN, and also it's Twitter, not whatever they're calling it now. That's yeah. Um, I sign back in occasionally to check my mentions and write anything, but I'm way less addicted than I used to be, which is a good thing. Um, and if you want, you can follow me on Instagram. Same handle, INKASRAIN. The not too much goes on exciting there, but I am there.
That's kind of how I feel about our social media. You can follow us at BNB or pod. We don't post much, but we do respond often when people check, like send things to us. And so if you are sending something of substance that's not, some sort of ad, then yeah, we'll probably look.
Yeah.
Um, and
Trump needs you to watch this.
exactly. Um, we do have an active Patreon, so if you're still doing that, we do live episodes from Avatar: The Last Airbender. We're halfway through season 3 for our live episodes, so we're coming close to the end, and all the good episodes are right in a row. So if you want in now, now's a good time to join that. And that's a wrap here, folks. We done it. Thank you so much for being a part of this. This was such a good conversation.
Oh, my pleasure. This was great. I,
Yeah,
I, I feel thoroughly excavated.
me too. Like, it wasn't time for that. Okay. Uh, but all right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and thanks for continuing to support us. Until next time, be well and do good.